Pan Cyans are a rare species of mushrooms that are growing in popularity. There's a lot of information on the internet, but at this point, it can be scattered and hard to find and put it all together. In this video, we will show you step by step how to grow these amazing mushrooms. For the rest of this video, I will be referring to these mushrooms as Pan Cyans for short. First off, what are Pan Cyans? Pan Cyans belong to the Paniolus genus, known for its very strong effects. In fact, one particular strain of Pan Cyans, TTBVI, happens to be the strongest mushroom in the world to date based on HPLC testing. Those mushrooms test above 4% in total alkaloids. In this video, we will be going over the process of growing pans in order from spore to harvest. We will be covering spore to agar, agar to grain, spawn to substrate, fruiting chamber or Martha tent, casing recipe, casing substrate, harvest, printing, and drying. We start our culture by going from spore to agar. This method is used for isolating and selecting specific characteristics as well as cleaning up the culture. We start by wiping the work surface with 70% isopropyl alcohol and then cleaning all the items that we are using in front of the laminar flow hood. This includes our torch, scalpel, spore print, and agar plates. Keep in mind, you can do all this work in a still air box. The next step is to prepare the plates for the spore transfer. Remove the parafilm from the agar plates and open and take out the spore print. Sterilize the scalpel with the torch and allow it to cool while opening up the print, being careful to not disturb or smear the spores. Take the spore print and gently scrape with the scalpel to drop the spores onto the agar plate. Repeat this for as many plates that you want to inoculate. You don't need many spores at all for them to grow out on agar. One spore print can offer many attempts at cleaning up a culture, and typically a spore print will last for years if stored in a cool and dry place. Wrap your plates with parafilm, then store your plates while the spores germinate on the agar. When working from spores, plan to make multiple transfers, sectoring clean, healthy-looking mycelium until you get solid tomentose growth. Agar to grain. Start by prepping the work surface in front of the flow hood by wiping it down with 70% isopropyl alcohol. Next, sterilize everything that will go in front of the flow hood, which will be the scalpel, colonized agar plate, the jar of sterilized grain, and the torch. Even though I'm working in front of a flow hood, I want to minimize the time that the grain and agar is exposed to outside air. So I'll prep my jar by loosening the lid, making it easy for me just to lift off and put in my chunks of agar when the time is necessary. Heating the scalpel until it turns red hot is enough to sterilize the blade. This is usually anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds. Make sure to let it cool before using. Next, cut out sections of colonized agar where the mycelium looks really healthy and free of contamination and drop that into the jar of grain. After I transfer the agar wedges to my grain jar, I'll give the jar a light shake so that the wedges are below the top surface of the grain. For Pan Cyans, I'll shake once around the 10-day mark and then let the jar sit to finish colonizing. Typically it takes around 2 weeks for the mycelium to completely colonize a quart jar of grain. Spawn to substrate. Break up your grain spawn jar by giving it a good shake. Today we are using a manure-based substrate containing exotic animal dung, coco coir, vermiculite, gypsum, and coffee grounds. The vessel we are using today is a disposable 9 by 13 inch cake pan with lid. Any size container can be used, but no matter the size, shoot for approximately a 1:2 or even a 1:3 ratio of grain spawn to substrate. It doesn't have to be exact, but as long as you get close, that's what matters. For Pan Cyans, around 2 inches tall of substrate mixed with spawn in your container works well in our experience. Mix your substrate and grains together thoroughly so that there's an even distribution. I'll generally put my substrate in my container first and then pour my grains on top and then mix. Gently pat down your grain and substrate mixture so that it's even. Make sure not to compress your cake too much. Cover your substrate with the lid or aluminum foil and poke 4 to 6 holes to allow the mycelium to breathe while the cake colonizes. Your cake will fully colonize in about 5 to 7 days, sometimes faster. Martha tent / fruiting chamber. There are a number of different ways to grow Pan Cyans, but today we will be going over a Martha tent setup. A Martha tent is nice because you have a lot of room for many experiments as well as automation. No matter the tech or method, we are wanting to create an environment where we can regulate humidity, temperature, fresh air exchange, and light. The basic components of a Martha tent is the tent itself, ultrasonic humidifier, a fan, lights, timers, and controllers. The tent creates an enclosed space to keep contamination out and hold humidity and temperature better than open air. We use an ultrasonic humidifier that is set to an automatic humidity regulator to keep it within a certain range. Generally, we aim to keep humidity anywhere from 85 to 90% through the fruiting process. As far as the location to pipe in the humidity, we find anywhere near the top of the tent works well. Pan Cyans like moisture evaporating off the surface of the substrate, which induces pinning. This is accomplished by using a fan. You want negative pressure, meaning air being pushed out of the tent. The fan is set to an automatic timer to turn on at specified intervals. A good starting place is to have your fan run for 3 to 5 minutes every 30 minutes. Adjust as necessary to keep your humidity within range, as well as reducing too much condensation accumulation in your tent. Lights can be used to give your mushrooms something to grow towards. We set ours on a 12-hour on, 12-hour off timer. Having your tent near a window that gets good light can take the place of supplemental lighting. The ideal temperature to grow Pan Cyans is anywhere from 77 to 83 degrees, but it is possible to grow them at lower temps, and we have seen success at 70 degrees and above. In terms of heating your Martha tent, you want to focus on heating the ambient temperature outside of the tent. This can be through the thermostat in your home or grow room, or by an external heater that heats the room the tent is in. Casing tech. Pan Cyans need a casing layer to fruit, and you want to use a casing layer that is non-nutritious. The point of a casing layer is to keep the surface layer of the substrate warm and moist, which are optimal conditions for the fruits to start growing. For the casing layer, you'll need peat moss, vermiculite, pickling lime, and water. For this recipe, we are using 2 quarts of peat moss, 2 quarts of vermiculite, 2 tablespoons of pickling lime dissolved into 1 quart of water. You can adjust this recipe up or down to fit the needs of your grow. Load the casing layer into jars or a mushroom grow bag. This recipe will make 4 quarts of casing and can be included in a grain spawn run in a pressure cooker. Pressure cook for 30 minutes at 15 psi. Casing substrate. After your substrate has fully colonized, it should look like this. You are now ready to case. As always, thoroughly clean your jars, tools, and workspace with 70% isopropyl alcohol before starting your work. Apply a 1/4 inch to your colonized substrate. Gently even it out with a spatula or knife. Then generously spray with water. Put the lid back on or foil and let sit anywhere from 12 to 24 hours before putting into your tent or fruiting chamber. You should start to see pins 1 to 2 weeks after placing the cased growth into the fruiting chamber. Harvest. Here comes the fun part. The ideal time to harvest your mushrooms is right before the spores drop. Pan Cyans do not have a veil, so harvesting them once the cap fully opens or slightly before will save a mess from the spores being dropped. Give your work surface and scissors a good wipe down with alcohol. Pans can be harvested by using scissors or a sharp knife. Some varieties, they can actually just be pushed down with your hand and they'll snap at the base. After you collect your harvest, it is time to rehydrate the substrate. Pour around a 1/2 cup to 1 cup of water directly onto the substrate. Make sure you don't have any sitting water at the bottom of your tray. If you do, pour it out. I'll generally wait an hour or so for the substrate to soak up water and check to see if there's any standing water at the bottom of the tray by tipping it over and pouring out any excess. Another way to water your substrate is to use a syringe and inject water directly into the substrate. A note on Pan Cyans. Pan Cyans don't like being dried out. It's not uncommon to have to mist your casing layer if it looks dry, or to spot water with a syringe or pour water as your mushrooms are fruiting. Printing. It's best to work in front of a laminar flow hood or in a still air box while making prints to reduce the risk of contamination. Lay out aluminum foil and wipe down with alcohol. Next, cut the caps off the stem and place on the aluminum foil. Arrange them in a grid so that they can easily be cut into squares for long-term storage. In our experience, using a dropper to put a drop of water on each cap helps the spores drop. Cover your caps with a plastic bin and wait 24 to 36 hours for the spores to drop. After the spores have dropped, cut into squares around each print, wrap in another layer of aluminum foil for protection. It is often debatable what the optimal drying temperature and duration is when it comes to drying your mushrooms. We like to dry our freshly harvested Pan Cyans at 140 degrees for 6 hours. When it comes to storage, putting them in a jar with a desiccant packet in a cool, dark place will keep them from degrading.